In this video, we'll take a look at how to use SAP Group Reporting Data Collection apps to map data from a CSV file to the ACDocu consolidation table. You'll learn how to download and use template files, and how to use the define data mapping and run data mapping apps to complete the process. To avoid building a mapping definition from scratch, you can download a template file and start from there. First, from the home page, click the Define Data Mapping tile. Inside the app, there's a list of your data mapping definitions. When you create a new one, it's displayed in this list. You can download a template to map data from the SAP S/4HANA accounting table, or a template to map data from a CSV file. You can also create, store, and download your own custom templates. To map data from a CSV file, select Download Template for File. Now let's take a look at the structure of the template file. A mapping file assigns source columns in a CSV file to target columns in the ACDocu consolidation table. In the metadata sheet, you define the data to be used in the mapping. There are two main columns. I stands for input and O stands for output. All columns are target columns. They contain all the ACDocu characteristics. Since the ACDocu target columns have specific names, these must not be modified. A separate column specifies which characteristics are mandatory. I columns are source columns. They contain placeholders. Replace these with the names of the fields from a CSV file. For example, let's enter cost center in the first data cell. When you're finished entering data in the metadata sheet, you can go to the mapping sheet. In the input column, you can now select the sourced columns that you defined in the metadata sheet. You can see here that cost center now appears as a choice in the drop-down list. In the output column, select the names of the ACDocu target columns. You can also have additional columns here. For example, if you click a cell and name it O, you obtain a new output column. Now that we've covered the structure, let's see how it applies to a real case scenario. So now we have our CSV file and our template file opened, and we've entered the input column names. Our CSV file has more columns than we need for the mapping, so what we've done here is we've selected only the columns we're going to include in this mapping. Inside a mapping file, you can have as many sheets as you want. We'll go over these different mapping examples. To simplify your mapping, you can use aliases. Aliases are short character strings that replace column names in your mapping. Here, the alias CC refers to cost center ID. One thing to note is that the system that generated the data inserts a hash character in the exported CSV file when no values exist for a dimension. Here, there are no values for cost center, so we're going to map it to an empty string. As for the cost center cells that do have a value, they'll be mapped to the cost center column in the ACDocu table. Then we repeat the process for PC and PCU. In the next sheet, using aliases, we simply map the values to the equivalent columns in ACDocu. It's also possible to enter a hard-coded value that's independent from any input dimension. Here, for example, we generate A000 for controlling area regardless of the input dimensions. Here are two additional features that you can use to define your mapping rules. First, Java-based regular expressions. Use these to change the target values depending on the input values. For example, in this mapping sheet, accounts starting with 1 will be mapped to defined target columns, and accounts starting with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 will be mapped to the same target columns but with a reverted amount for amount in local currency. In addition to these filters applied to the input columns, we can apply functions to output columns to have a specific value format in our output. Here, the keyword replace allows us to replace the first character of the transaction type ID with 9 in the ACDocu target column. You can find out more expressions and keywords on the SAP Help portal. Great, our mapping file is now ready for import. Let's go back to the Define Data Mapping app to create our mapping definition. We click Create, then we give it a name and a description. Under Source Definition, we choose File as Source. You can modify the general settings if you want to. For example, there are several types of text identifiers. Then we select our mapping file, and now if there are syntax errors in the mapping file, they'll be listed in the errors section. And finally, we click Save to complete the process. Now that we've created our mapping definition, we need to create a mapping job and run it to transform and send the data to the ACDocu consolidation table. We access the app directly from this page by clicking Run Data Mapping. To create a job, we click Create, we give it a name and a description, and then we choose the mapping definition we've just created in the Define Data Mapping app. Now we select the job we want to run from the list. We select the CSV file and click Run. Our data has been successfully transformed and sent to the ACDocu consolidation table. For more details on the data transformation and data import, you can click a row to consult the logs. For more information, check out the SAP Help portal. Thanks for watching.